The barn went silent, the way a room goes silent right before something breaks. Claire Bennett stood at the long wooden table, surrounded by nearly 50 relatives and neighbors, watching her father's eyes move past every other face in the room and land on hers like he'd been waiting all year for this exact moment. "In every family," Walter Bennett said, loud enough for the back tables to hear, loud enough that even the kids stopped chasing each other near the dessert table, "there's one child who walks away." He let the silence stretch. "For us," he said, "that's Claire." Nobody laughed. Nobody gasped. They just went quiet, the way people do when they've heard a thing so many times it no longer shocks them, it just confirms what they already believed. Claire didn't flinch. She'd had 5 years to practice not flinching. She reached down beside her chair, picked up a slim, leather portfolio she'd brought in from her truck that morning, and walked it to the head of the table. She set it gently beside her father's plate, right next to his untouched mashed potatoes. "Happy Thanksgiving, Dad," she said quietly. "Read it when you're ready." Then she turned, picked up her coat, and walked out of the barn into the cold November air, her boots crunching gravel as 50 pairs of eyes followed her out. She didn't even make it to the end of the driveway before she heard her father's voice crack across the yard behind her. Not angry, something closer to terror. "Welcome back to the family revenge tales." Claire hadn't left the Bennett ranch 15 years ago because she hated it. She'd left because she loved it too much to watch it slip through careless hands, and because, even at 21, she understood something her father and brother never wanted to admit. Love isn't the same thing as good judgment. She went to law school. She specialized in agricultural land and estate planning, the kind of work that mattered most in places exactly like Boone County, Iowa. Farming families one bad year away from losing everything to a bank, a lawsuit, a bad signature on the wrong piece of paper. Over the years, she became one of the most trusted attorneys in 3 counties. Families drove 2 hours just to have her review a contract before they signed it. Everyone except her own family. To Walter, her career looked like abandonment dressed up in a nice blazer. To her younger brother Ethan, who'd stayed behind to run the cattle ranch their grandfather built, her success was a quiet accusation he never stopped resenting. And somewhere in that resentment, an entire family had convinced itself that the daughter who left was the daughter who didn't care. Nobody asked why she left. They only noticed that she had. 5 years before that Thanksgiving, Claire's mother, Eleanor, had been fighting cancer. Claire remembered one hospital visit more than any other. The smell of antiseptic, the low hum of the monitor, her mother propped up against pillows that seemed too white against her skin. "You look tired," Eleanor had said, reaching for Claire's hand. "Are you sleeping?" "I'm fine, Mom. Stop worrying about me." "Somebody has to," Eleanor said, managing a small smile. Then her eyes drifted toward the door, toward the hallway where Walter and Ethan stood talking to a doctor. "Has your father said anything to you about the ranch?" Claire hesitated. "Not really. Why?" "Because I don't think he's telling either of us the truth," Eleanor said quietly. "I see the mail. I see his face when the phone rings." When Claire gently raised it later that same visit, her father waved her off without even looking up at Eleanor's chart. "We've got it handled," he said. Ethan, sitting in the corner with his arms crossed, added, "I'm handling it, Claire. You don't need to worry about things you don't understand anymore." "I understand contracts, Ethan. That's literally my job." "Your job is reading paperwork. This is running a ranch. Different thing." She understood better than either of them. Months later, Ethan convinced their father to put the ranch up as collateral for an expansion loan, a speculative cattle-feeding partnership with a business contact Ethan had met at a trade show. Claire read the paperwork in under 10 minutes and found enough red flags to fill a legal pad. "This isn't a partnership," she told them, sitting across the kitchen table from her father and brother. "This is a structure designed so that if it fails, you carry all the risk and he carries none of it." "You always think the worst of people," Ethan snapped. I think the worst of contracts, she said. There's a difference. For just a moment, something flickered across Ethan's face. Not anger, but doubt. He glanced down at the papers like he might actually be considering her words. Claire, he said, quieter now, I just want to do something that matters here, something that's mine. You got to leave and build your own thing. This is the only thing I've got. It was the closest he ever came to honesty with her. She almost reached across the table. Then Walter spoke, and the moment closed as fast as it had opened. You spend your whole life telling other families how to save their land, and you can't even trust your own. Ethan straightened back up, the doubt gone from his face like it had never been there. Dad's right, we're doing this. 6 months later, the business partner vanished. The investment collapsed. The ranch was left holding millions in debt it could never have survived on its own. And somehow, in the retelling that followed Eleanor's funeral, it wasn't Ethan's signature on those papers that the family remembered. It was Claire's warning. She had questioned it. She had challenged her brother. She had left home years before that, hadn't she? In everyone's mind, slowly and almost without anyone deciding it on purpose, she became the reason things had gone wrong, simply because she was the one who'd said something. No one in that family ever knew that during Eleanor's final months, an anonymous account had quietly covered thousands of dollars in treatments, medications, and private hospice care. The payments came through a law firm's trust account, untraceable to anyone who wasn't looking specifically for them. Eleanor knew. She never told a soul. Nearly 3 years passed before Claire, after several unanswered phone calls that felt heavier than usual, drove out to the ranch, unannounced. She found her father in the kitchen, the same kitchen where he'd once told her she didn't understand things anymore. While making coffee, she noticed a stack of mail shoved beneath a pile of old farming magazines, county tax notices, foreclosure warnings, the unmistakable shape of a crisis someone was trying very hard not to look at. Dad, she said carefully, holding one of the envelopes, these are months overdue. It's handled, Walter said, not meeting his eyes, the same 2 words he'd used 5 years earlier. It's not handled. It says right here you have weeks before the county. It's handled, Claire. His voice was sharp, but underneath it, she heard something closer to fear than anger. It wasn't handled. The ranch was weeks from being seized. What Claire did next, she did without telling anyone. She refinanced her own office building. She liquidated investments she'd spent a decade building. She used every dollar of savings she had. And when the lender finally sold the distressed debt to a private investment firm, Claire was the one who quietly bought it first. She didn't call her father to collect. She didn't send a single bill. Instead, she created a family land trust and made it the legal holder of every major lien against the property, freezing all collection activity before a single notice could go out. Walter kept living on his land, drinking his coffee on his porch every morning, never once learning that the only reason he still had a porch to drink it on was the daughter he'd called a disgrace in front of 50 people. Months after the funeral, while sorting through her mother's belongings, Claire found something tucked inside Eleanor's old recipe book, between handwritten instructions for pie crust and a stained recipe card for Thanksgiving stuffing. A sealed letter with her name on it. Her mother had known about the ranch, about Walter's pride, about all of it. She wrote that her husband would rather lose everything than accept help from the one child who'd had the courage to question him. And then she'd asked for one thing. Protect this land if you can. Protect your father if you must, but never let this place fall into the hands of someone who loves money more than family. Claire folded the letter and kept it in the inside pocket of every blazer she owned from that day forward. It became less of a letter and more of a promise. That Thanksgiving, the one that started with her father calling her the child who walked away, Claire had noticed things nobody else seemed to. Ethan stepping away from the table twice to take phone calls he didn't want overheard, his wife Brooke smiling a little too brightly at another relative and saying almost to herself, "Once everything transfers, we can finally breathe again." Ethan mentioning more than once something about closing the deal before Christmas. While the family gathered outside for photographs, Claire slipped quietly into her father's office. On the desk sat a leather portfolio she didn't recognize. She knew the moment she opened it that she wasn't supposed to be looking at it. Inside were the bones of something her father almost certainly didn't understand he was agreeing to. A power of attorney granting Ethan broad authority over the property, contracts with a renewable energy company, a proposal to lease nearly the entire ranch for an industrial solar development, with clauses quietly built in allowing future sale options down the line. Walter believed he was simply organizing his estate. Ethan was giving away generations of family land, one signature at a time. Claire photographed every page with shaking hands, careful to place each document back exactly as she'd found it. She understood something in that moment that almost made her laugh out loud, alone in that office. Ethan had made one critical mistake. He didn't know about the trust. He didn't know that the largest legal claim on that land already belonged to his sister. Without her approval as trustee, none of it could ever legally move forward. His entire plan was built on a transfer that could never happen. Before dessert was served, Claire found her father near the barn doors, away from the noise of the party. "Dad," she said quietly, "before you sign anything else, let me look at the paperwork, please. As your daughter, not your lawyer." Walter turned to face her, and for 1 second she thought she saw something soften in his expression. Then it hardened again. "You stopped being part of this ranch the day you walked away," he said. "I never walked away from you," Claire said. "I walked away from being told I don't understand my own family." He didn't answer. He just turned back toward the barn, and that silence told her everything his words hadn't. That was when Claire understood the truth could no longer stay hidden, not because she wanted to win, but because there was no longer a version of silence that protected anyone. That evening, alone in her law office, she assembled the portfolio, not as a weapon, but as a record. Recorded trust documents, proof of the debt she'd purchased, years of tax receipts paid quietly in her own name, documentation of anonymous medical payments for her mother, copies of every page from Ethan's hidden contracts. No accusations, no letter explaining herself, just facts, laid out the way she would lay them out for any client who needed to understand exactly where they stood. And so it was that portfolio sitting beside her father's plate when the dinner ended, when Walter stood once more to thank the people who had stayed loyal, when he looked at his daughter and said the ranch would survive another generation because of the people who stayed. Claire watched her father's hands begin to shake as he opened the folder, right there at the table in front of everyone who had just watched him humiliate her. The barn went quiet again, but differently this time. People leaned in instead of looking away. Walter's lips moved without sound as he read, his face changing with each page, confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked almost like grief. "This can't be right," he murmured, flipping back to the first page. "The tax payments, these dates." "They're real, Dad," Claire said from the doorway, having walked back in without anyone noticing. "All of it." "Ethan," Walter said, finally, not loudly, just enough for the table to hear, "did you know about this? The solar company, the power of attorney?" Ethan's face went pale. For a moment, he looked like he might deny it. Then his shoulders dropped, and something honest finally broke through. "I was trying to fix what I broke, Dad. "The cattle deal. I lost us everything, Dad, and I couldn't say it out loud. I thought if I could just get one deal right." "By selling the land out from under me?" Walter's voice cracked. "I didn't think you'd ever agree to it the right way," Ethan said, "so I didn't ask." Brooke, sitting beside him, had gone pale and silent, her hand slowly sliding away from his on the table. Within days, the solar contracts were canceled before a single signature could finalize them. Ethan's power of attorney was revoked. The family established a new conservation and inheritance trust, one built to protect the land for good, regardless of who tried to claim it next. Brooke left Ethan not long after, unable to reconcile the man she'd married with the one who had nearly sold his own family's legacy out from under his father's nose. Ethan, for his part, didn't fight her leaving. He told Claire once, months later, that it was the first honest consequence he'd ever let himself sit with. Several weeks later, Walter drove alone into town and parked outside Claire's office. He came in without calling first, hat in his hands, and sat across from the desk where his daughter had spent 15 years protecting families exactly like his own. "I don't know how to fix 5 years," he admitted. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, his voice didn't carry any pride in it at all. "You don't have to fix it today," Claire said. "I called you a disgrace in front of 50 people," he said, "and you'd already saved us twice by then." "I didn't do it so you'd thank me." "I know. That's what makes it worse." Claire looked at him for a long moment. "You don't fix 5 years in one conversation," she said gently. "You start by telling the truth. That's all it ever takes to start." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. There were no tears, no long embrace, no speech that undid 5 years of silence in a single afternoon. But Walter nodded, and for the first time, it was an honest beginning instead of another excuse. Claire kept the promise she'd made to her mother in that quiet kitchen letter, not because she wanted credit, and not because she ever needed her father's apology to know what she'd done was right, but because some things are worth protecting, even when no one's watching, and even when the people you're protecting don't yet know they need it. If this story moved you, consider subscribing to the Family Revenge Tales, because every family carries someone like Claire, the quiet one, the one who's misunderstood, the one who keeps showing up even when no one says thank you. Stories like hers deserve to be told, and your subscription helps us bring you more of them. And if there's one thing worth carrying with you tonight, let it be this. The truth doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is keep doing what's right in silence and trust that someday the truth will find its own way to the table. What is the significant educational or other value in the story? This story teaches that genuine love and loyalty are often expressed through quiet sacrifice rather than public approval or recognition. It illustrates how family narratives can be shaped by misunderstanding and scapegoating, and how easily blame can fall on the person who speaks up rather than the person who caused the harm. The story also highlights the importance of financial literacy and legal protection within families, especially around inheritance, debt, and property, since a lack of transparency can put generations of hard work at risk. It shows that even people who cause real harm, like Ethan, are capable of honest reckoning when finally confronted with truth rather than shame. Finally, it offers a hopeful message about reconciliation, showing honesty, patience, and accountability, not revenge, are what ultimately rebuild broken trust.